Hello everyone, thanks for joining me again at the workbench. Today I'm building an F-15EX using the Great Wall Hobby F-15E kit, upgraded with the Caracal Models conversion set, and I'll walk you through the entire build step by step. Let's get started. When you open the box, dozens of bags filled with detailed parts greet you, showing the scale and complexity of the model right away. Some parts will not be used or are optional, so make sure to carefully study the instruction manual before starting the build. Looking closely at the parts, the level of detail on each piece is truly impressive. However, there is a mold line visible on the canopy. To build the F-15 in the new EX version, this detail conversion set is essential. The first thing that catches your eye in the box is the colorful assembly plan, along with the canopy and exhaust masks and the detailed cockpit decals, all packaged separately. The rest of the contents include the 3D printed cockpit, exhausts, wheels, pylons, antennas, and more. To convert this kit into an EX version, an additional decal set is of course required. Alright, let's dive into the build and start bringing this F-15EX model to life. I carefully cut away and remove the protective support frames from the resin parts, taking my time to avoid damaging any of the fine details and to ensure a clean fit later on. Since the connection points on the parts are quite thin, removing them from the resin blocks can be done relatively easily and with good control without putting stress on the delicate details. But even so, extra care is especially required when working on the cockpit parts, as they contain very fine details that can be easily damaged. However, there are some classic 3D printing layer marks visible on a few parts, though they are minimal. I easily removed these marks using a 1000 grit sanding sponge, working slowly and evenly across the surface to smooth out the layers without damaging the surrounding details. For proper installation, the inner surfaces of the wheels must be completely cleaned, removing any excess resin, mold release residue, or imperfections to ensure a precise fit and proper alignment later in the build. After carefully preparing all the resin detail sets, making sure each part is cleaned, trimmed, and ready, I move on to the painting stage to apply the first layers of color to the model. In the reference photos, the F-15EX cockpit appear to be mostly black, with very subtle tonal variations that are important for an accurate appearance. I carefully masked the cockpit side panels to protect the surrounding details and achieve clean, sharp paint lines. I paint the panels using a slightly lighter shade than pure black. I applied dry brushing to the parts using various gray tones and a wide brush, gently working over the raised details to bring out depth and contrast while keeping the overall look subtle and realistic. I painted as many differently colored details as possible, adding visual interest and realism while breaking up the darker tones of the cockpit and surrounding areas. The brush I use for painting small details isn't anything special, and it's actually quite an old one, but if you're curious, it's simply a calligraphy brush. When painting the buttons, I'm not actually painting in the traditional sense, but rather just touching the surface lightly with the brush. Using thicker paint works better here, so don't thin it, and you'll get much better results. After finishing the detail painting, let's add a bit more refinement to the cockpit and its related parts using decals to enhance the overall level of detail. Caracal Models provides a very nice decal set for the cockpit, but in some areas I also use the decals supplied by Great Wall Hobby. I used some placards and instrument markings from the kit's original decals, mainly in areas where they matched the references better or helped fill in smaller details that were not included in the aftermarket set. All the remaining decals are from Caracal Models, providing the cockpit displays and placards with excellent print quality by cartograph, showcasing very fine and precise details that really bring the instruments and panels to life. The displays and placards are very high quality and extremely thin, making them easy to work with, and with just a single drop of microsol, they settle perfectly into place. With the exception of a single decal on the right side, all of the seat decals come from the set provided by Caracal Models. Once the decals are placed, brushing over them gently with microsol allows them to fully conform to the surface, settling perfectly into every contour and detail. Now I can start assembling the cockpit parts that I have carefully prepared, taking my time, to ensure each piece fits perfectly and aligns correctly, while preserving all the fine details I've painted and applied decals to. I glued them in place using super glue, in other words, cyanoacrylate glue, making sure each part was securely positioned without disturbing the surrounding details. On the other hand, to be able to close up the nose section, the nose landing gear bay also needs to be completed. So I took care of that as well. I finished it in a clean and straightforward way without adding excessive detail, focusing mainly on a neat overall appearance, since most of it will not be very visible once the model is assembled. I really like the cockpit design. As you can see, the seats can be mounted along the ejection rails, which makes painting and final assembly much easier. The cockpit sidewalls are kit parts, and they are not fully compatible with the resin cockpit, so the highlighted surrounding area needs to be cut away for a proper fit. As you can see, the cockpit fits into place without any issues, and the nose section has been closed. I added at least 20 grams of weight to the nose section to ensure proper balance. After placing the weight, I carefully positioned and glued the radome in place. I cleaned up the mold lines on the visible areas of the air intakes using 400 grit sandpaper wrapped around a wooden sanding block to keep the surfaces flat and even. There were so many mold lines deep inside the intakes that I didn't even bother touching them and just glued them in place, since I plan to cover the intakes with FOD covers in the final build. The F-15's intake has a movable ramp at the very front. When the aircraft is on the ground with the engine off, the ramp is technically at 4 degrees up, which appears completely flat. Select and attach the part that matches this position. If the aircraft is active, the ramps take a downward position, technically angled 11 degrees down. Luckily, Great Wall Hobby provides pieces for both versions. Removing the mold line on the canopy is necessary, but it's not as difficult as it might seem. First, I carefully separate the canopy from its frame using a heated blade, taking care not to crack or damage the clear part. Then I mask the exact mold line area that needs to be cleaned, so the clear sections of the canopy are protected and won't be damaged during the next steps. First, I remove the mold line using 800 grit sandpaper, followed by 1000 grit to further smooth the surface. After that, I slightly expand the worked area, using very fine 4000-6000 grit sanding pads to further smooth the surface and prepare it for final polishing. After wiping away the excess dust, I move on to the next stage and start polishing with Tamiya Compound Coarse. Then I continue polishing with Tamiya Compound Fine, and finally finish the process using Tamiya Compound Finish to restore full clarity. Finally, I use Tamiya Wax to remove any remaining residue or dust, leaving the canopy clean, clear, and ready to use. Now I can mount the canopy onto the fuselage. I quickly do a dry fit, and that's when I notice this problem. The glare shield ends up sitting outside the canopy frame, whereas it should normally be contained within the frame. I'm not entirely sure where the problem originated, but as a solution, I had to cut the glare shield from the bottom and reinstall the front instrument panel. It's not a perfect fix, but it was the best solution I could achieve under the circumstances. I install the rivet decals on the inside of the front canopy piece. It's a very visible and important detail that really stands out. Caracal Models provides a clear part for the HUD display, but only the outline is visible, so you still need to cut it out yourself. The size isn't a perfect match and it's a bit thick, so it's best to cut it to your own measurements for a proper fit. After positioning it in place, I secured it using a white glue that dries clear. I can now glue the canopy in place. After doing many dry fits, I confirmed that it would join without any issues. So, once it was positioned, applying just a very small amount of Tamiya extra thin cement at the corners was sufficient. I assemble the fuselage using slow curing super glues. First, I secure the position, and then I use an accelerator to quickly cure the adhesive once everything is aligned properly. The kit's overall fit is not very good, and in almost every section, sanding and surface correction were required. I mainly relied on filling and sanding to correct gaps and uneven joints, gradually refining the surfaces using sandpapers ranging from 400 to 1000 grit until everything aligned properly. Of course, after that, all the lost panel lines had to be rescribed one by one. For this task, I used an extra fine razor saw to carefully restore the details. While test fitting the nose section to the fuselage, I encountered another fit issue. This is why dry fitting is one of the most important steps in my workflow. Most likely because of the cockpit detail set I used, the nose section ended up being slightly thicker. I realized that before gluing it in place, it would be much easier to thin it down and bring it to the same level as the fuselage. I carefully sanded the nose section to the desired thickness and then glued it in place. Since the gap between the nose and the fuselage was relatively small, I was able to correct it at this stage. Instead of using putty, I used super glue, as it cures faster and saves me time. After cleaning up the remaining scratches with a sanding sponge, I was able to eliminate this problem as well. The reinforcement plates on the horizontal stabilizers are much too thick. In the reference photos, they are barely noticeable, so I carefully reduced their thickness using a 2000 grit sanding sponge until they looked much closer to scale. I installed the remaining parts on the fuselage without any major issues. Great Wall Hobby provides a few small brass detail parts for specific areas, and these also need to be added, as there are no plastic details for those locations. Installing them helps complete the surface details and brings those areas up to the same level of realism as the rest of the model. It's time to install one of the essential resin parts from the Caracal Models conversion set that is absolutely required for the EX version. I cut along the correctly sized panel line to separate the plastic section, then carefully clean up the area. After proper surface preparation and a dry fit, I glue the resin part in place. With a small amount of sanding and final cleanup, the job is complete. I intentionally install the rudder parts on the vertical tail at a slight angle, which will give the model a more dynamic and visually interesting finish. At this stage, I also fit the corresponding fuselage parts from the conversion set into their proper positions. The lower section of the vertical stabilizers is not compatible with the resin part, so this area needs to be trimmed slightly and adjusted to achieve a proper fit. The final fuselage parts are the EX variant pods from the Caracal conversion set. Both the nose and vertical stabilizer pods were installed flawlessly with minimal trimming. As the build moves into the painting phase, I'm preparing all the airframe components. The landing gear was delicately cut from the sprue with a precision side cutter, and mold lines were meticulously sanded out. I assembled the associated details, masked the landing lights, and organized all parts for the upcoming paintwork. The F-15EX conversion set also includes a pre-cut canopy mask, ready to use. Each mask is shown in a different color on building manual, but since the actual mask is a single color, you'll need to determine which mask goes where. The masks included in the set only cover the canopy frames, which means the intersections of the canopy need to be carefully masked separately using appropriate masking tape. To prepare the canopy for painting, I temporarily positioned it on the fuselage using a tacket-style reusable adhesive putty, ensuring it stays properly aligned throughout the painting process. Finally, to safeguard against any possible paint seepage or leaks during the painting process, I carefully applied liquid mask to the central areas of all previously masked sections. This extra step ensures that even the most vulnerable interior surfaces are fully protected. I always start painting with a black primer to establish a uniform base. Immediately after, I proceed with the main color. Since the F-15 features a two-tone scheme, I first sprayed the lighter of the two main colors across all surfaces, using an airbrush for a smooth and even coat. Using the same tacket-style putty, I shaped it by hand into long, thin, rounded strips. This technique allows me to carefully adjust and mold the putty exactly as needed, pressing it firmly onto the surface so that it conforms perfectly to the contours, effectively masking the underside areas while giving me full control over placement, coverage, and ensuring a clean separation between masked and unmasked sections. I'm now proceeding with the second, darker tone of the camouflage. The paint must be applied at as close to a perpendicular angle as possible and in a steady manner. Otherwise, there is a risk of creating double lines or uneven edges along the color boundaries. Proper masking is absolutely crucial, and it may require a significant amount of time at this stage. The results depend heavily on precision, because even the smallest masking error can ruin the finish and force you to repaint the entire model. Fortunately, no such issues occurred with this build, and everything went smoothly. For the main colors, I used Hataka A157 and A158 acrylic paints. Next, I masked the radome. Using masking tape strips from thin to thick, I carefully work outward to cover the area precisely, ensuring a clean separation for painting. The color I used is medium gunship gray. I also mask the metallic areas on the F-15 fuselage and paint them section by section with the airbrush, using different color mixtures for each area to achieve realistic variations and depth. I painted the exhausts with an aluminum base color, then applied a mixture of clear orange, red, and yellow tones on top to achieve the shade I found most appropriate. It's decal time, using the Caracal Model F-15EX decal set for accurate and detailed markings. By scanning the included QR code, you can access a more detailed placement guide and instructions. The decal application follows the standard procedure used in scale modeling. First, I apply a generous layer of a microset and water mixture onto the surface, which provides some working time and flexibility to adjust the decals precisely into position. Once the decals are carefully placed, I allow them to settle briefly. As they start to dry, I gradually brush over them with microsol, which softens the decal and helps it conform perfectly to all surface details, panel lines, and contours. This process ensures that the decals integrate seamlessly with the underlying paint. Of course, the surface must be glossy before applying the decals to ensure smooth adhesion and prevent silvering. For larger decals covering wider areas, I also used Tamiya Mark Fit liquid to help the decals conform smoothly to the surface contours. I completed the placard decals on the pylons using the decals provided by Great Wall Hobby, carefully positioning each one for accurate placement. The decals included in the kit are not perfect but decent, offering a fairly straightforward application process and acceptable adhesion. Once the decals are fully dry, I usually wait at least a day, I go over each decal with an airbrush using the base colors thinned much more than usual. This subtly mutes their bright, fresh appearance, helping them blend naturally with the surrounding paint and giving the model a more realistic, worn-in look. Using a standard 0.5mm pencil, I carefully trace over each panel line. This not only sharpens and emphasizes every panel, but also allows me to recreate any faint or incomplete lines. Afterward, I apply a black wash across the entire surface to bring out the rivets and other fine details. The panel lines enhanced with the pencil stand out much more prominently than they would with wash alone, giving the model a more defined and realistic look. For areas where I want a darker effect or wish to simulate oil stains and grime along the panel lines, I use a less diluted black wash. I apply it with a brush in controlled sweeping strokes, almost as if I were painting, creating subtle variations and a more realistic, weathered appearance across the surface. I'm applying the final effects on the fuselage, carefully detailing areas like scratches on the in-flight refueling door and emphasizing the darker tones on the ventilation panels to enhance depth and realism. I also painted the arresting hook at the rear, ensuring it stands out with a metallic finish that reflects its functional and worn appearance, tying together the weathering and final detailing of the airframe. I take a regular graphite pencil, grind it into a fine powder, and lightly apply it over the masked metallic areas as if polishing them. This technique gives those sections a more authentic metallic sheen and enhances the visual depth of the metal surfaces. There are also a few small decals to apply on the landing gear, which I completed using the decals provided by Great Wall Hobby. Even a tiny decal in the landing gear area can make a big difference in the overall finish of the model. Applying them is a delicate and sometimes tricky task, but it's a necessary step to achieve that final look. On the other hand, I cut a piece of metal foil tape to the appropriate size and wrapped it around the landing gear strut, achieving that chrome metallic look on the shock absorber. I'm now carefully removing the canopy that I had temporarily positioned in place using the tack-it putty. I lift it very slowly and gently to make sure that the underlying putty doesn't disturb or damage the delicate resin details beneath. Once the canopy is fully removed, I go over the area and carefully collect any remaining bits of putty, making sure the surface is clean and ready for the next steps without leaving any residue or marks. I'm now installing the final cockpit components from the Caracal model conversion set. As I mentioned earlier, the seats can be removed and reinstalled at any time, which is very convenient and adds flexibility to the build. On the nose, I noticed a final model-specific panel that I had initially forgotten to address. I carefully scribed the panel lines and painted it, completing the last unique detail for this build. In the references, I noticed that the F-15EX's ailerons always appear drooped when the aircraft is on the ground, and the hydraulics are inactive. For this reason, I'm installing them at a slight angle, accurately reflecting that natural on-ground posture. Since the original kit is an F-15E, the under-fuselage pylons are designed for different payloads. However, I wanted to mount AMRAAM missiles in these positions, so I had to make some modifications. First, I marked the areas with a pencil and then carefully cut additional pylon slots to replicate the appearance of the pylons as seen in the references. In addition to mount an AMRAAM missile on this pylon, it's necessary to use parts 2 and 3 from sprue O. This sprue is normally not used on the F-15E variant, so these parts are left unused in a standard build, but they are essential here to correctly configure the pylon as seen on the F-15EX references. I drilled several holes into the main pylon mounted on the conformal fuel tank and inserted appropriately sized round rods into each hole. These rods act as the primary structural supports for the pylon, allowing it to mount much more securely and solidly to the fuselage. Otherwise, I found attaching this pylon directly to the fuselage both difficult and risky, as achieving proper alignment was quite challenging. After trimming and cleaning the excess from the main support rods, I glued each bracket into place one by one, ensuring proper alignment and a secure fit throughout the assembly. I'd like to emphasize again that the U-shaped bracket is a mandatory component for this pylon when configuring it to carry air-to-air missiles. It's now time for the aircraft to stand on its own feet. The landing gear installs easily into place, and using a small amount of CA glue was sufficient to achieve a strong and secure bond. The raised lettering and fine details on the wheel set provided by the Caracal model conversion set were brought out using the dry brush technique. Afterward, the wheels were assembled in the specified order and installed in their final positions. Here, dry fitting is once again extremely important, especially to ensure that all wheels sit correctly and evenly on the ground. I always use a slow-drying CA glue at this stage and install all 3 wheels first, then gently place the model on a flat surface to carefully adjust their alignment and achieve the correct stance. I couldn't find a definitive method for positioning the 3 side-mounted pylons on the conformal fuel tanks. Due to the sanding work I carried out in earlier stages, all locating marks were lost because they were very faint. So in the end, I positioned and glued each pylon by eye. The canopy interior details are provided by the kit, which is a nice feature. However, the supplied mirror detail is not very accurate and could be improved, so I replaced the kit mirrors with Edgewood photo-etched mirror parts for a more refined and realistic result. I painted the PE mirrors in a rough, freehand manner, then used a toothpick to carefully clean the paint from exactly the areas I wanted, achieving the desired look with precise control. I'm very careful when gluing the canopy frame. I apply a very small amount of CA glue only to areas that are not close to the clear parts, preferably at the corner points, to avoid any risk of fogging or damage to the transparent sections. Next comes the completion of the exhaust sets from the conversion set. Although a dedicated masking set is provided for the exhausts, I found the masks a bit too thin for my preference, so I chose to hand paint each of the black sections to achieve better control and coverage. As you can see, I painted many of the 3D printed parts directly on their own supports. The supports are well designed and positioned on non-visible areas, which made it possible to clean them up confidently even after painting without damaging any visible surfaces. Once all the parts were prepared, I assembled them one by one in the correct order, completing the General Electric F-110 GE129 engines, which are specific to the F-15EX variant. The F-15EX is capable of carrying an impressive 12 AMRAAM missiles, making it one of the most heavily armed air-to-air fighters in service. However, for me, this also means extra work, preparing, painting, and finishing all 12 missiles one by one. Building all 12 AMRAAM missiles one by one from plastic would have been extremely time-consuming. So I decided it made more sense to use 3D printed missiles instead. This approach saves a lot of time while still delivering a clean and consistent result. Since they are 3D printed, there were of course no decals included, so I masked and painted each color individually. I started by painting the nose white and masking it off. White also works as an excellent base for blue, so I followed up by spraying the blue areas. Once that was dry, I masked the blue sections as thin bands, and then applied the main gray color to complete the missiles. Instead of masking and painting the fins, I found it easier to hand paint them. I combined the missiles with both the standard missile rails provided in the kit and the additional F-15EX specific underwing rails from the conversion set. After carefully aligning each missile with its corresponding rail, I completed the assemblies, ensuring everything was properly fitted and ready for final installation on the aircraft. The fit of the vertical stabilizers is excellent, so I was able to install them easily using only a small amount of CA glue to secure them in place. I then continued working on the rear fuselage and installed the previously prepared General Electric F-110 GE129 engines. Since these engines are not kit parts, there is no built-in internal support, so you need to create one inside the fuselage. I filled the interior with tack-it putty and used it to securely position and hold the engines in place. The horizontal stabilizers can be installed in their correct positions without any modification and even without glue. Because of the numerous mold marks and very visible seam issues inside the air intakes, I planned from the beginning to cover them. For this purpose, I asked a friend to 3D print FOD covers, and while he was at it, he also printed covers for other areas, which made my job much easier overall. Since these covers are always fitted together with remove before flight flags, I used Eduard photo etched flags to complete the look accurately. The new Legion pod mounted on the center station is a 3D printed part, while the lantern pod is the one provided in the kit. I continue with the protective covers on the underside of the fuselage. The antennas being 3D printed with their covers already in place is a very smart design choice, so I only had to paint them and install them in position. After sufficient dry fitting, I identified the exact contact points of the missiles and mounted them to the under-fuselage pylons precisely from those areas, ensuring a proper and secure fit. As I install the final FOD cover parts and watch the number of remaining components on the workbench slowly diminish, the build is clearly reaching its final moments. The model now looks complete from almost every angle, with only a few small details left to address, bringing everything together and signaling that it's time to slow down, take a step back, and prepare for the final touches and a proper farewell to the project. After nearly 2 months of work, this build finally comes to an end. It's my first model carrying a full load of 12 air-to-air missiles, and it represents the latest evolution of an aircraft as iconic as the F-15. From planning and modifications to painting, detailing, and final assembly, this project has been both challenging and rewarding. I hope it has been useful, inspiring, and enjoyable for you to watch, and that you've liked the process and the final result as much as I enjoyed building and sharing it with you. See you on the next project. Thank you for being part of this build from start to finish. Wishing you plenty of productive and enjoyable scale modeling time.